G'day everyone, I'm Cody Royal, head coach of AFL Team Canada and the author of Where Others Won't. Today on Dov Barron's Leadership Show, we bust three main myths on how sport is relevant to business. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Barron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Barron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Barron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. Well, today we're going to take an insider look at the game of leadership. Is sports really a good metaphor for business, or is it just hype? If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you download your podcast from. And we need your help in staying relevant. So please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. When you do, please go to our Facebook page and our LinkedIn pages and join in the group there, and let's chat about what's gone on today's show. If you're in the United States, you can catch us on traditional radio stations across the US every Monday and every Thursday, all the way from Georgia to Colorado. So also look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers and regular listeners. And we want to thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners around the world. And with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every show, we're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc. magazine as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And you can also find us on Alexa and Google Play by simply saying, play Dov Barron podcast. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Now let's strip it down. Let's dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that we have got to treat our top talent like team players. But how do we create a culture of that's a high-performing team that actually works? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Our guest today is Cody Royal. Now, if we are going to refer to our employees as teammates, then maybe we should know how a high-performing team actually works. Cody Royal solves that problem. He offers us not only a look behind the curtain of pro sports, but he actually walks us through what it really takes, what really is going on to make a pro team excel, and how we can mirror that in our business. Cody wants to bring the business of sports out of the motivational category into a place where it squarely sits in the center of mainstream leadership and business discussions. He is the head coach of the AFL Team Canada. He's the author of the hit sports book, Wow, Where Others Won't. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Cody Royal.
90,000 people tuned in. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Welcome to Wembley Stadium, my mate.
That's good. Thank you for that intro. Much appreciated.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. So let's jump in. Why should any business look at pro sports for ideas? I mean, it seems like every motivational video has got some sports coach in there. It seems to be a bit sort of yelling and testosterone and cliche. Why should we actually listen?
That's a great first question. That's exactly what the book is aiming to achieve. Is I think we've come to this realization in the business world, and I've been there for over a decade myself as I've been coaching on weekends. We've realized that now it's all about people. And so competitive advantage is the X factor that you have with your people. And pro sports has been doing that for decades. And so I think there's some really smart recruitment processes and high performance processes that are just sitting there in pro sports that we don't talk about, because we just invite the quarterback in and he gives a talk about motivation, and we think that's going to fix everything. So yeah, the book was really kind of my attempt at translating what really goes on in teams in pro sports back to the business world.
Yeah, one of the things you talked about in the book, and that is kind of fascinating, is that many of the things that are every day in sports and sports teams, particularly high performance sports teams, that we in business and in leadership are seeing as the cutting edge, have been well established for over a decade. Is that right?
Oh yeah, there's so many. The most recent one is mindfulness and meditation. It's a really easy example, but I think the Chicago Bulls, I think it was 93 when they started.
93, let's just get everybody grasp that. 93, that's 15 years ago, and now it's kind of cool and trendy in business.
25 years ago.
I mean, 25 years ago, yeah, sorry. 25 years ago, now it's becoming cool and trendy in business.
Right, yeah. Quarter century ago, this high-performing team were weaving that into their day-to-day practices, everything from breathing together to mindfulness and meditation before they take free throws. So you could actually see them in 92, 93, breathing while they're about to take a free throw and clearing their mind. And so, yeah, there's these things that have just been sitting there that we don't take notice of, because, again, we would invite Michael Jordan in to motivate us rather than saying, what else can you teach us about how high-performing teams work?
So is that what you mean by wanting to bring the idea of sports out of the motivational and into the mainstream discussion of business and leadership?
Yeah, definitely. There's so many examples like that. Even recruitment is a key one where I think we're really struggling in the corporate world around, just basic recruitment. They don't need to be the top performers. They just need to be the right performers for our environment. But we're still stuck in this, here's the 20 questions that we Googled we should ask someone. And we sit there and we checklist people. But, there's so many examples in pro sport. And the great thing is that they play out in the public domain. So we get to see them on an everyday basis and see how they work. And they're quality tested over decades and decades. And so if someone can explain them to you, which is what I'm hoping to do, you can grab that little nugget and say, the New York Yankees tried this little recruitment hack. That might actually work for our environment.
So give us an example of that, Cody, because that's really important, because recruitment and retention, massive issues in business today. Yeah. And, one of the things I've challenged a lot of leaders on when in my work with them is I say that I think potential is a complete waste of time. Because who gives a shit? I've got potential. When I was a kid, I was an artist, and everybody thought I was going to be an artist, including me. Right. That was my potential.
Right.
I don't paint anymore. I don't sculpt anymore. I maybe still have those abilities, but I don't have that pull anymore. The potential is actually who gives a crap. Right. So help us with this, because that whole piece around what you're talking about there seems to me to tap right into the vein of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll give you one little kind of snippet, and then I'll go into an anecdote that I learned while I was interviewing for the book. The first one is, we don't even bother asking people what they're good at. At a basic interview, we don't say, like, what are you super passionate about? You might be going for an accounting job, but actually you want to be a graphic designer and you have a really unique set of skills over here that don't seem relevant, but it may actually be relevant. There might be a pivot somewhere in there that person can get you a competitive advantage, but we don't even bother to ask. We sit there, how many years of SAP do you have? Check. How many years of blah, blah, blah. Name me a time when you had to navigate a
difficult situation in that,
a difficult co-employee, blah, blah, blah. And so, there's some really, really basic things that we can do, even at the interview stage, to really find out what people can do and then how to motivate them when we get them on the job. And that was really put into my mind by Joe Dumas, who most people will recognize his name. He was part of the Bad Boys, the Detroit Pistons that won throughout the early 90s. He went on to become the team president, and he built the team that beat the Los Angeles Lakers when they had Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant and this superstar team. And Joe recruited based on the stories of the players. He wasn't interested in how high they were drafted. He wasn't interested in this or that. He said, tell me your story. And then he went and got guys that had a chip on their shoulder, that kind of embodied what Detroit was. It was a little bit of a, in the early 2000s, was starting to struggle a little bit. And so he put together this fabulous team of guys that had been traded 6 or 7 times and not drafted. But he just said, tell me your story. And that's all he needed to know. And I think there's something in there that we kind of lose. We say, we checklist people, like I said before. We don't actually find out their story and what they want to do and what they want to achieve. But you put those people together and you can just watch them blossom.
Well, you just brought, for me, 2 things that I just like screaming in my head that I just love. And one is that I've always said that no learning is lost, meaning you could have gone off and studied something that you thought was like, and then you go, that wasn't really what I was about. And that's fine, but I don't think there's anything lost. I think in that there's something that you will take away. It might only be a little fragment of a 4-year program where you've got like this one-liner, but it's what counts for you. And that's at one level of it. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting what you said, I had a discussion this morning with a very good friend of mine, like literally an hour before you and I met today, and he was telling me about a new, I am not the sports guy, so he's telling me about this new hockey team out of Las Vegas, right? Who were 500-1 against doing anything, and every guy on the team, he says every guy on the team. And this is before we had the discussion. He goes, every guy on the team probably has a chip on their shoulder. And I said, why? And he goes, because they're guys who've been drafted 5 or 6 times. They've been sort of pushed to the back of the line. They've been rejected. And in order to create this expansion team, they had to give away, each of the teams had to give somebody away. And they gave away, and they've created this superstar team of chip on the shoulder. Is that really what you're talking about?
100%. And that's another great example and a very current example, obviously. But yeah, these were the guys that they were number 15, 16, 20 on the teams last year. They got given up on. And there's one player that went from scoring 6 goals last year to 40 plus this year. And so there's kind of discussion around, creating environments where people can do what they're good at. And that's a prime example where in one team he's a 6-goal scorer. You flip him over to this, what should be a mediocre team, a 500-1 team, and he's scoring, 40 plus. And in the NHL, where there's the talent gap is so tiny, the gap between 1 and 100 is minuscule when you see these guys up. There's a lot to be said for that. And going back to kind of, how we do that in the corporate world, again, we have to ask the right questions. Like, what can you do? What do you even think you're good at? Might be something completely different, but that then helps us manage them once we get them on the job and, push them into things that are going to allow them to flourish.
So what do you think is the key factor there? What do you think is the point that creates that? Because you said, some players are 6-goal and then they turn into a different environment and they become like crazy number difference. What is it? What is that environment? You talk a lot about culture in the book, and you talk about the culture of teams and the culture of businesses. What is it in the distinction of the culture that allows somebody to go from being bottom end to top end? Yeah.
This is a really good question. And this is what I'm obsessed with. I'm obsessed with the craft of how this all comes together and the craft of leadership. And my answer to your question is one of the things that I talked about in the book. I call it contextual leadership. But I think leadership is upside down. And I think, we've fooled ourselves, or the old model was that, I would be on your team, Dov, and so I would just follow you. Whereas I think if we flip that on its head for modern day, now it should be that as a leader, you're following the team and what they're capable of. So kind of stepping through. So we've asked this person in the recruitment process, what are you good at? And then that is now helping me lead you to where you want to go. So if you say, look, I scored 6 goals in the NHL last year, but I think I'm better if you put me on the left side rather than the right side. You know, and then the next person says this and the next person says that. You bundle all that together and you create, you know, this environment around what your people do best. I think that's where we can at least have a starting point for allowing, you know, the cumulative powers of people to add up to in Vegas's example, a massive competitive advantage.
Sure. It's interesting because it's one of the primary principles we teach in our work as we go in with teams and companies and organizations. And we say that the first skill of leadership is here. It's listening. And we think that the first skill of leadership is speaking. You know, this is my thought, I'm the leader, and I'm going to tell you what it is, as opposed to listening. And one of the things we say, and this is interesting, that we say, we want to know what's going on, what's not working, that's fine. But we don't want to hear that first. Yeah. We want to hear where you feel like your potential, the truth of who you are, not some fancy potential that they think you have, but the potential you know you have. Because those are the difference. Potential you think I have, the potential I know I have, if you would create an environment for that for me, I'd flourish. And that's what we want to know. So it seems to be like what you're talking about is like the first thing is like, let's get to that. Is that right?
Absolutely. And the real art is that gap that you're talking about. What I think I'm capable of and what you think I'm capable of, that's where the real leadership is. You know, because then the discussion becomes, I think you're selling yourself short, mate. Like, I reckon you can get to here and I'm going to help you do that. Here's what I need to see from you, but I will help you get to there. And that's where the real art of it is. And so, you know, the good thing is in pro sports, what we see is, you know, these leaders know that it's a daily activity. There's not weekly catch-ups in the NBA, Premier League, or there's not monthly catch-ups. It's daily. These guys walk around the locker room and say hello. How are you? How are you doing? Are you feeling okay today? To everyone on the team. And then, you know, those sort of discussions just snowball. And as people's objectives change over time, which they will, you know, you can monitor that. The example I use in the book is, you know, when Johnny has his first kid, he's your top sales guy. His priorities are going to change now. You know, he can't go to the bar anymore and sell at the bar after hours. He needs to go home to his kid. And so as a leader, you need to be on top of that because that's going to affect how you lead the people.
So you've got a couple of things here. You've got, first off, this old school idea that I'm the leader and I'm going to lead and you're going to do as I tell you. And that I'm suggesting that you're saying that that is now, if not outdated, certainly a myth now. It just doesn't work anymore.
It'll work, but I don't think there's longevity in that anymore.
Okay, so it's a tired model that's already wearing thin. Then you've got this other piece, which I think is so vital and I think is so often missed in leadership, Cody, and that is that, you know, I had a discussion with a founder the other day, and I said, okay, tell me 5 people you interact with in your company on a regular basis, right? So he talked about 4 executives, and the other person he talked about was his assistant. And I said, great, let's go with your assistant. And I said, is it male or female? And he said, it's female. I said, great. Is she dating? And he says, yeah. And I said, how long has she been dating? He said, 2 years, blah, blah, blah. He starts telling me some details. And I go, pretty good. And I said, because I had a little bit of an inside track. So I said to the CEO, this is the founder and the CEO, right? So I said to the CEO, is that true? And he goes, nope, they broke up 3 months ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, so the CEO knew because the CEO is actually one of my private clients, so he knows a lot of stuff. So, but he said, it's not true. So what is it? It's true that the founder did do some of that, but didn't do the day-to-day, which is what you're talking about, didn't stay updated. So if that person's performance falls away, you're just like, well, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But that day-to-day touch point that you're talking about, that team leaders, organization, team leaders in sports do, how do we translate that into the world of business? Because it's obviously the argument we're going to get back is, yeah, that's fine. That's part of how sports is done. But in business, it's bottom line, buddy, and every minute counts.
Yeah, but I think there's starting to become some really prevalent examples of businesses, big businesses. Netflix is one that are modeling how sports teams work.
Mm-hmm.
And we can really look to them as kind of bastions of what I'm talking about. They're not the only one, but it's an easy one for people to kind of grasp onto. But I think, there's, again, what we're looking for here is competitive advantage.
Right.
And so, I amass a team competitive advantage, an internal competitive advantage to selling more product, to signing more clients.
Sure.
But we need to look after our own garden before we can look after anyone else's. So again, what I've tried to do with Where Others Won't was say, here's the existing examples already. They're in short snippets. Here's ideas about how you can translate this from pro sports, whether you know anything about, whether you even know who Michael Jordan is. Here's the idea, and here's what it means in the current business environment. And you might be able to adapt that to your own environment. I think what we fall into the trap of doing is making blanket statements that all these examples are going to work for everyone. And particularly with pro sports, we look at, the New England Patriots and say they do all this great work and they win all the time. And so we just try and adapt that. That's not going to work for everyone. So
no,
it doesn't even work for, teams have tried to sign away all the Patriots coaches and GMs and they've never been able to replicate it. And so it's a perfect example. It's really about cherry picking the verbiage that's going to work for you, the structure of recruitment that's going to work for you, the structure of your organization.
But the argument of that would be, surely, at least, but these are the best people. We have cherry-picked the best people. We have paid the millions of dollars to get these great players or these great coaches on board. And if we translate it into business, to these great executives or these great managers on board, why isn't it working? Mm-hmm. And I know you speak a lot about in the book about culture. Talk to us about culture and what that actually, what it is we think it means in business versus what you believe it needs to mean, and how we need to operate in order to create these highly competitive, cutting edge organizations.
Yeah. Well, the first thing there is back to, we've hired the best people. I think it's not the best people, it's the right people.
Right.
And that's the first mistake that we make, is we look for the high flyers coming out of university and we sign them to PwC, and we think that the job is done now.
Mm-hmm.
The job isn't done. And so moving on to culture, really, again, I see this as a bit of a fluid thing. It's going to change over time. And so as we progress through cycles, the culture is going to change. New people coming in. Every time you add someone, detract someone, the culture changes. Mm-hmm. And so what we do currently is we slap a couple of words up in the foyer and say, this is our culture, but we never actually ask anyone whether they believe in that culture. The example that I wrote about in the book, and this is one of the most fabulous examples I've heard of this, was Southampton Football Club in the Premier League. They brought in Ralph Kruger, who was a lifelong hockey coach, ice hockey coach, and they asked him to run the team. And the first thing that he did was he had an all-hands meeting. They had 204 full-time staff, and they sat there for 5 hours, and everyone spoke on the microphone. And everyone spoke and said, here's what I do. Here's what I think the club can be. Here's what I think my role can be. Here's what I think every single person.
Wow.
And Ralph just sat there with the leadership team and they took notes. and they molded the culture around what the people had said, and knowing that that's going to change over time. But at the moment, here's what our goals are, and this is what our people believe we can be. We don't do that in the corporate space.
No.
But that's really what the culture is. It's a collection of beliefs and of behaviors of the people, whether it's a country or a company or a sports team. And unless we know what the people think, how can we say that we have a culture?
That's fascinating. Who, because you interview NFL and NBA, you're from the Australian Football League world as well. I mean, you interviewed a lot of these leaders, including in business leaders. Was there certain things that just stood out for you as like, wow, here's this pattern that just keeps showing up? You know, these patterns even that keep showing up. Was there things that just were like screaming at you?
Definitely, yeah. Especially from the top guys. So your guys that I've mentioned, Ralph Kruger, Joe Dumas, Ted Sundquist, who was the general manager of the Denver Broncos in the NFL. These types of leaders, what I observed was the consistency was how people focused they were, even in my interview, down to little minute details of, they didn't know me from a bar of soap, but calling me by name and, pushing meetings back, having great conversations like, look, let's keep going with this. And there was just this, this consistent, personality is the way to say it, with these high-end leaders, that they just understood what we were doing and were intrigued by the conversation. And you could just tell that if the receptionist was sitting there with them, they would treat them exactly the same that they were treating me, and they would treat the top-end player exactly the same. And that's why I was really fascinated by it, and that's where the kind of core idea or the genesis of the book came from was sports has this hyper-focus just on people. And so you can't change the product and you can't change the process and all this sort of stuff. You have to just be able to change the people and lead the people better. And it was fascinating because that was my hypothesis, that sports was good at that. And it was really the thing that stood out for me, that it's exactly what it was. And, I had dinner with Joe Dumas last week in Los Angeles. This guy sitting in the corner of a restaurant is in the NBA Hall of Fame, and just a lovely, lovely human. And you can see why he's been successful anywhere he's gone in sports or business.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I had a meeting last week with my board of advisors, who are 9 people who are crazy successful. I mean, it's just like, way beyond where I'm at financially. And I just look at these people, and it's fascinating to me that consistently, not just in my board of advisors, but in a lot of the exceptional leaders that I've met in my 30 odd years of doing this, and they're always focused on relationships. That is at the core of who they are. They're relationship driven, and they care about people, and always they're extraordinarily generous.
Yeah.
And that is, and it's one of the things that, I mean, as a kid who grew up in a ghetto, I had this bullshit stuff fed into my head that, successful people were tight asses and they didn't care about anybody else. And it's exactly the opposite. I find them extraordinarily generous and extraordinarily relational. And interestingly enough, the ones who are struggling are not. They're not generous and they're not relational, and they're looking for the next strategy. Yeah. And so I wondered if that is consistently what you see when you look at sports, or the people who are sort of stuck in the middle versus those who go to the extreme.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because one of the guys that I interviewed for the book, his name was Igor Koskov. And at the time he was at the Utah Jazz. And he's just been promoted to the head coach of the Phoenix Suns. And Igor's story was, he's from Serbia. So he's an exile and came to America in the early 90s and has been a basketball coach ever since. And it was fascinating just to see even people from such vastly different backgrounds, that it was still that consistent. He understood when he was coaching the Slovenian national team that he had to connect with those guys on a different level from how he would treat his NBA players. Different dynamic, different motivational tools because of it's a different environment. And so, his day job would be over here in the NBA, and then, for a couple of months he'd go and work with Slovenia. And I had a fascinating conversation with him about what you just talked about there, Dov, where it's unrelenting, and that's all he kept coming back to in the interview. No matter where I wanted to take it, it was always back to this same philosophy: what can I do to help you? And so you can see why the Phoenix Suns are going, I like this guy. I think he can come and coach our team.
Yeah, it's amazing, huh? It's really quite fascinating. So, I'm interested in this part of your research because, again, not a big sports fan, but I'm very big leadership fan, and it shows up in sports a lot of times, right? And I don't often know the teams or anything, but I do know Liverpool, the Liverpool Soccer Club. And I read probably, I think maybe back in 2015, I think it was, about how they were doing so well. And the reason they were doing so well is they had psychology coaches. That was, they brought people into the teams who were focused entirely on the psychology of the team players. And I put that at the sort of top of the list. So, your shooting is off, your penalties are off, your defense is off, your headers are off, whatever it is. Okay, but let's forget all that for a minute. Let's not get you out there and practice doing headers and trying to get it in, or practice trying to do saves or penalties. No, let's get you in and find out what's in the way, find out what's driving you. And I was like, wow, that's so cool to see that. I can see that, but I couldn't imagine it being at the front.
Right.
Is that, do you see that? Is that shifted? Is that what it is?
Yeah, definitely. The big thing in sports at the moment is this idea of marginal gains. And, at the very, very top, which Liverpool Football Club are at, you're looking for 0.5% to 1%, which again is super relevant to what we do in business, where, the big five banks or the accounting companies, they're looking for really marginal gains. And so the search has been on where can we get these marginal gains from? And obviously we know that we only know a small percentage of what happens in the brain, and there is a gain to be made there. And the example that I wrote about in the book, which I found fascinating, and I actually reached out to them about this, was the Australian soccer team uses sleep as one of their key KPIs, which for an athlete is kind of obvious, but it's to the point where they can monitor the performance of their players based on their sleep and say, you don't train today, or you're going to start on the bench. And so, I was playing around with ideas about how do we convert that into the corporate world. And it might be a little bit invasive, but at the same time, like when's your performance on? Like, when can we get the most out of you? If you have a bad sleep, maybe you don't come into work today. There's, I think there's something there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Arianna Huffington's written a lot about how sleep impacts us and rather the lack of sleep impacts us. But it's very interesting, and particularly when you think about, you sort of put business and sports side by side. When you look at those two things, you think about, you are supposed to perform on the day, whether you had sleep or not, right? The deadline is here, buddy, and you gotta step up. And what you do around knowing that this is the big day. So, for instance, if I've got a big presentation, I'm pretty certain I don't sleep the night before.
Right.
It's just, I know I'm going to go with probably around 4 hours sleep. Now, is that ideal? No, but I actually feel pretty damn good the day I go to speak. I'm rocking it. The next day, I'm a bag of crap. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Right? So the day before, so I'm speaking on Monday, Sunday night, Monday. That's a crap sleep. I get up, I'm rocking it. I'm in good shape, and there's no sense of a lack of sleep. But that night, Monday night, I'm dog poop. But it's interesting because I used to say, "Oh well, I can work Tuesday."
Mm.
But the truth is, if I'm at 20% on Tuesday, that's a pretty good day because I know I'm just not going to be able to do it, and it's because I know I put everything into it. And I don't think that we think about these things. We think about the event, but we don't think about the pre and the post.
No.
And that's fascinating. And I'm sure you found a lot of that research.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And again, going back to that idea of marginal gains, this is what sports is all about at the highest levels, is where do we get that 0.5%? And often it is in things like recreational time and when that is. An example, I live in Toronto, and recently a couple of the Raptors guys were captured by TMZ at a casino at 1 a.m. And it became this uproar, but these guys play at 8 o'clock every night, and so their day is completely backwards.
Of
and
course.
So whether they're out until 2 a.m. or home in bed, it doesn't really matter because they can sleep in till midday, still have 8 hours before the game, and then go and play. And so, yeah, I mean, really what we're talking about is rearranging all these structures that we've forced ourselves into through, the old age of business.
Well, you see, you just said it there, and I think this is the point that I want people to grasp, is I think if we're going to look at things, we've got to look at things in the context of where they are versus where we think they should be, right? And so this is a very interesting point, because I talked about this in my last book, Fiercely Loyal, where I talked about millennials. And in that book, I talked about if you are a baby boomer or even a Gen Xer employing millennials and you're pissed off that they're coming to work at 11 a.m., you're dead in the water.
Right.
Because the fact is they may be completing their project at 1 a.m. Right? Because that's when they're in their flow, and it's good for them. And so you've got to look at results, not time. Right? And it's the same thing with this. It's also knowing, like, for instance, I had a great interview on here with Steve. Forgot his last name. I'm going to brain fart here. Excuse my cranial flatulence. Stephen Kotler, and we were talking about flow states.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And we were talking about flow states, and Steve and I had a couple of chats about this, and it's interesting because some people are very much morning people, some people are very much evening people, some people are very much night people. And rather than saying, well, you've got to do your best between 9 and 5, it's just dumb. It's just, it's forcing people into a box. Like, I know I work fantastic at 5 a.m.
Yep.
I also know I work fantastic at 11 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
I also know that I'm crap at 2 in the afternoon. Right? And I just know that. I'm sure I should live in a Latin American country because I am of a siesta culture in my brain, right? My brain works that way. Early in the morning, no problem. Right out of the gate as the sun rises, love it. Last thing at night, and what it is for me is it's quiet time. Yep. But in that hustle bustle of the day, I just want to crash for an hour, even 20 minutes. But it's knowing those things about yourself and knowing those things about your players that is vital, that when they have to step onto the field, whether that's the field of the boardroom or that's the field literally of the field, it's knowing when is your player at their best and how have you set them up for that rather than forcing them in the box. So now we're at two different levels of so we've got potential as a person and their skills and potential of energy and availability, right?
Yeah, exactly. Going back to our discussion around recruiting, that's something that's worthwhile asking. Whether you can enact it or not, maybe not. Like, who knows? But at least ask.
You should know.
You should know, because there might be a shift coming. Who knows when the world is going to shift again, and we're going to need to know that information. And it's funny, as you were talking there, I was thinking about a conversation I had recently with Patty McCord. If you don't know Patty, she was the VP of HR for Netflix. And she said, you know why we used to go into the office? Because that's where the computers were. And now, now this there it is.
Carrying it around.
Yeah, in my hand. And so, we need to rethink all of this, not just the physical locations, but when people are working. When can we create the biggest competitive advantage out of our people? If that's at 11 p.m. at night, who gives a shit?
Right.
At the end of the day, if you're looking to sell more products, which again, we've established that we are, if that's done through administrative work or whatever it is at 11 o'clock at night from, somewhere in China, it really makes no difference. But
No.
again, we aren't setting ourselves up for success because even right from the recruitment process, it's just, this is a pain in the ass. I'm just going to Google an interview sheet and ask these 20 questions, and then, I'll get someone else in and we'll just hire them.
Right.
We put no effort in at the front end, so we get no effort in the back end.
That's it. Now, you, just as a sort of quick here, I want to give people a context of, because you've been, you've coached at sports in a very high level in more than one country and more than one, in more than one environment. And you also have a background in business, and you've been working in the business world as well. What was it that inspired you to want to write a sports to business book? What was it that brought that about? What was the catalyst for that for you?
Yeah, it was really about 2 or 3 years ago when I was the head coach of the national Aussie Rules program. And so on the weekends, I would go and develop this high-performing team, Saturday and Sunday. And then from Monday to Friday, I would walk into this corporate environment and, have a manager that, showed mastery at maintaining a low-performing culture. And so whilst I was trying to figure out exactly how the best teams in the world work over here, then I had to go and be a part of this low-performing team over there. And there was just a light bulb moment. It was one of those Simon Sinek, like, this is it. Mm-hmm. This is the one. And I've been kind of blogging about it for about 5 years. And so it struck me that the differences in sport and business, even though they're both, in the people sphere,
mm-hmm.
We were still stuck in that sports is motivation. And I wanted to talk about something different because I'd seen both. I'd had to recruit players. I'd had to lead them. I had to build culture and build high-performing systems that allowed them to thrive. But I'd also seen what it's like in some of the biggest businesses in the world. And it was just one of those really stark moments where, I was probably in a shower or on the treadmill or somewhere where
you're doing something where you didn't have to think too much. You're
doing, which is where you do your major thinking. And
right.
This is a discussion that needs to happen because I think there's so many quality tested ideas just sitting there waiting for us to even just have a discussion about.
So what, give us another one of those, Cody, another one of those, we talked about mindfulness and, so give us another one of those things that the sports has been doing for, to use a term, been doing for yonks and the business is like maybe not even on the edge of it yet.
Yeah.
But you're seeing that, like, come on, guys, catch up.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. So, we've kind of talked about a couple, but another anecdote, the general manager of the Denver Broncos, Ted Sundquist was his name. He was there for about 10 years. He won a couple of Super Bowls with the franchise. And he was the general manager, and he would go down and speak to the turf guy. And this was kind of the mid-90s.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in constant contact with the turf guy who would prepare not only the field that they played on, but the practice fields. And he would go down and say, what's going on with the turf? Is there anything that I can do to help you? And the turf guy says, there's this particular type of virus in, mountainous United States through the central western part of the United States that only occurs here. And if we get it, the grass is going to be clumpy. If the grass is clumpy and our quarterback falls over a clump of grass, he could be out. But, you know, Ted's thing was, well, he came back to me and said, no one's ever asked me that before.
Right.
You know, no one had even gone down to this guy who knew very well what his role was and that he was super important in terms of getting the players onto the playing field. He said, no one's ever come down and asked me that before. The lowest low of level, literally the guy in the garden shed off to the side of the stadium, was one of the most important people in the whole franchise, and no one had gone down and talked to him before.
So what's the business lesson there? Because I love that, by the way.
Right.
So if you could translate that over to somebody who is watching us, who is a leader, not even in the Fortune 500, but just a leader in a business and an organization, how would that translate? How would they get that? What would be the thing for them to do?
Yeah. This is your front line. You got to be in conversation with your front line. And it's easy for us to think about the front line in sports as being the team, but actually it's the guys that get them onto the field. So, you know, it would be going to your network guys and saying, what are the IT threats at the moment? Like, what are the most current ones? What's going to happen? You know, and then if it does happen, how do we prevent it? Do we need something? Or, you know, going to your customer service guys, you know, what's happening at the moment? What are you seeing in the market? Because then you're making more informed decisions about, you know, where you're trying to take the business. But really, again, we're stuck in this model of the CEO being up here, and, you know, he's got these layers, VPs and directors and managers, and so it's supposed to go all the way down. But the groundsman is your front line, and he's going to impact your performance just as much as the quarterback.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things I've spoken about so many times on here is that we're with the boards, we're with the executives, we're with the top people inside of an organization. When we go in and we help them to design a culture based around purpose and purpose-driven leaders and purpose-driven organization and purpose-driven culture. But here's the test. And that's what we say to them. Here's the test. We're going to go out and talk to the receptionist.
Yeah.
We're going to go out and talk to the person who answers your phones. We're going to go out and talk to the people who make tea. You know, we're going to go out and talk to those people and ask them what the culture is. Because they don't have to give a crap.
Right.
But if it matters, they will.
Yeah.
Right? You as an executive, you have to. You're going to memorize that stuff because you know it's important for you to look good in you, that you can say, well, this is our purpose, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? I'm the person who makes tea. It doesn't really matter to me unless it does.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that's the testing ground. And I love what you're saying there about going to the turfsman. That's the testing ground. Because the interesting thing about it, as you said, and I think that's why I love it as a metaphor, is we look at who's center forward, who's the top player, and we go, you know, oh, this is the goal scorer. We got to really listen to the goal scorer. Michael Jordan was a great player. He was a terrible team player. And it was only through his coach that he learned, and he was actually told, I wrote about this in one of my pieces, that he was told to back off from scoring and become a team player, which was very hard for him to swallow. But if he hadn't trusted his coach, he wouldn't have been able to do that. So he gave everybody else a chance to come up, and they became to play as a team. And this is the thing, is that we've got so much focus on the superstars in business. You know, we create these fucking divas who are poisonous to the culture, and we don't take care of the culture. And this idea of talking to the groundsman, who is that person? Because like you said, if that guy understands that a clump in the turf could trip up your top player and take him out of the game, oh, why didn't we listen to that guy before? Too late now.
Yep. Exactly.
Fabulous. Great insight, Cody. Great insight.
And the thing as well as a test for that is that person should mirror the verbiage that you're using at the top end as well. So these keywords that you use, and not just, again, slapping, you know, your culture on the foyer wall and saying this is what we're about. There's language that happens within any team and any organization. And if the true test is if that groundsman if that IT person says the same words that you use at the top end, that's when you know you've got a strong culture. And we're literally talking the same language.
So tell us, as we sort of draw towards the end of the show, what is it that you want, our business leaders watching, listening to the show, what is it you want them to get in a very practical sense? What is it that you not only want them to get, but you want them to get out there and do within the next, certainly preferably 24 hours, but let's say the next 5 working days? What is it you want them to put into action with what it is you're saying?
Yeah, the 24-hour goal really is like, go and talk to your team, like one by one, and go and ask those questions that we were talking about before. Find out, is she still dating? Like, what's going on in her life? Because there's so much to be garnered from that in terms of how you lead 48 hours a week, 2 weeks, a year. And I think in the business world, if once we have an understanding of that, we can make better predictions about where we're heading and our financial goals and all the things that we definitely need to tick off, how many units we've sold. We can't reverse engineer that unless we know what's going on in the lives of the people on our team. And so I think there's just a quick win. Go for a walking meeting with everyone on your team and ask them about what's happening in their life. And I guarantee you will come out, firstly, fresher, and secondly, with a better picture of where you're headed in the future. And then where I think we can go is, I'd like to unpack more of these ideas for people, because I think they've been sitting there for a long time, like mindfulness.
Yeah.
And it's more just an awareness thing and a branching out mentally of, actually, this is really relevant to us. Yeah, they do recruit really well over here, or they've built an interesting culture here, or whatever it is. They're sitting on surface level, and again, they play out in the public domain. So literally you can switch on the TV and see how these teams are working, which I think is what's fascinating about it, is they're just sitting there.
Yeah. And like I said, I love that you're giving us that inside track. I love that you're giving us that way of seeing behind the curtain, behind the rah-rah, behind the hype, behind the motivation. That, hold on a minute, there's nuts and bolts to this. It's not a Al Pacino version of a motivational speech, to a football team, but actually here's what's really going on. I like that. I mean, of course it's motivating, but it's practical.
Yeah. And there's peaks and troughs, and there's mini projects within them, and there's blocks of a month where you lose all the time, and it replicates the business world so much more than we think it does. Sure, there are things that are completely irrelevant, I get that, but there are so many things that are incredibly relevant that hopefully I can bring to the fore for your listeners and people that are tuning in.
Well, I think there's a lot but as a side there, I think there's a lot of things that we in the business world would think are irrelevant until we sit down with you, until a company brings you in and sits down and you go, oh my God, I never thought about it that way. Because this is the problem. We've all got our bias,
yes,
right? And that bias blinds us. It becomes the blinkers that stop us seeing the rest of the view. And that's why it's important to bring you in, to sit down with them and just say, well, oh, I never thought about that.
And it's not what you see in the newspaper. I can tell you that. It's so far removed from what actually happens. And plus I've removed the fandom from it as well. I can get to those nuts and bolts for you.
Fantastic, Cody. Total pleasure. Really enjoyed having you on. Please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you, about your new book, and about the work that you do and the resources that you have available for people.
Yeah, definitely. So the book is only available on Amazon. So punch in Where Others Won't. You can visit whereotherswon't.com as well. And there's a whole raft of blogs that went into the book, and ideas that have come up subsequently, interviews that have come up subsequently after the book. And it's all my speaking information's on there, how to book me, how to buy a book, how to contact me, all of the above, whereotherswon't.com.
Fabulous. And thank you so much, mate. It has been a pleasure and honor having you here. Really enjoyed it. And I hope we shook a few people up around this, because this is, it's a great insight. Really is. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. And for you, dear listener, I want you to remember that the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies can be somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they realize that they are spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leave them at an alarming rate. And if you're sick of training and developing your talent only to have them leave it before you got your ROI, come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to keep you and your organization at the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. And also remember, you can get yourself over to matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W. Matrix, like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool valued at $197, absolutely free to you for being a regular listener. And remember, you can find us on Google Play and on Alexa. Simply say, play Dov Barron's podcast. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. And watch out for our new sponsors coming up very soon. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about where you have got some rigid ideas about what fits and what doesn't fit. And maybe where the real marginal differences that will change and transform your entire business is in a simple conversation, a walking conversation, where you get to find out what people really feel good at inside of your organization. There's so many gems in today's show. Go back, listen again. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. Until next time, I am out.